Hey, how's everybody doing? You like my suit? Oh, I'm reading this book, Ready Player One, right now. I don't know if anybody's read it or seen the movie, but the entire school takes place online, like in this virtual reality. So anyway, I thought it was funny that I'm reading that right now while we're doing this. Um, so last thing we talked about in history class was the Philippines, U.S. taking over the Philippines from Spain, and the Filipino War of Independence continuing. It goes from 1889 to 1913. Longest war the United States has ever been in, other than Afghanistan. And over 500,000 Filipinos die. A lot of this is due to disease and starvation. Some are combat casualties. The U.S. doesn't help in that the U.S. creates these concentration camps, which, if you remember, Spain did the same thing in Cuba, which is part of the yellow journalism, part of U.S. journalism saying, look at what these Spanish are doing. This is so horrible. Evidently, the United States thought it was a good tactic and so started rounding up Filipinos. Problem being is that if there are diseases, obviously you put a bunch of people together and now it starts to spread, people die. So at any rate, Philippines becomes an area where the U.S. is sucked into a pretty long war, more or less pacified by 1913, and is now part of the United States. So it brings us to World War One. So I want to talk about World War One because the context of the United States becoming involved. But before we get to the United States, we're going to talk about kind of the roots of the war itself. So here I put Europe in the world, and I put this day 1608. So this date is when England actually invades part of India and captures a portion of it. They don't conquer all of India, but it's sort of the beginning of a European country attacking an African or an Asian country, taking over and actually saying, like, this is our land now. We administer this land. So here we are. This is British India. They also control Burma, the Malay states down here. If you'll notice, Siam, what we call Thailand, is actually independent. They retain their independence. French Indochina is modern day Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Down here is Indonesia, which is owned by the Dutch. Uh, Eastern half of New Guinea is split between Australia and Germany. And there's quite a few islands out here in the Pacific that are owned by different European countries. We have Africa, and this is by 1878. I mean, Africa's carved up completely. You've got Liberia here on the west coast, which is actually former U.S. slaves as an independent nation, and then you have Ethiopia here on the east coast, independent nation. All the rest of Africa is divided up between these countries. So it kind of leads us to our, the beginning of this sort of idea of multiple causation of World War One. And so I've talked about this before. Rarely in history is there, uh, a major event that is just caused by one occurrence, right? It's usually several factors that lead to this major event. So one of them being imperialism. And so all these European countries, it's like a prestige thing. It's like your number of likes on Instagram. How many countries have you conquered and control as colonies? And it's kind of what that letter from Kipling to the United States was about. Like, hey, U.S., like get in on this, man. Like you guys are missing out, right? Although the more practical side of imperialism here is the natural resources. You conquer a place, you take all of their natural resources, you don't give them much in return other than maybe an infrastructure which you need to get the natural resources out. And it makes your country wealthier, makes your country more prestigious. And it also sets off like this race between countries to conquer as much as they can, and then conflicts over who actually owns this portion or that portion, which is what we start to see in Europe. Also have the rise of nationalism. So kind of this idea that our culture, our language, our country is very good. It's kind of like patriotism, but like taken to the next level. Like, we're better than everybody else, and we probably should be running everything. We probably should have some of that land of yours too. So Germany and Italy, up until the late 19th century, were not countries. They were different principalities, common language, but they were not united. Both were united in the 1870s. Serbia is a very small, sort of like rump country, but the reason they're important is because there's quite a few Serbians still in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which we're going to talk about, lead us into World War One. Militarism is another big one. It's just the idea of like building up your military. If you look over here, you can see this top picture is a battleship from 1900. It's actually, I think, built 1898. Looks almost like a yacht. It's got a few of these, guns sticking out of the side down here below. Not super imposing. And it's, you can't tell from this picture, but it's made out of wood with armor plating on the side. And then you get down to a ship from 1915. This is actually a British ship. And this battleship is made entirely out of steel. It runs on oil versus coal, which makes it more fuel efficient. And then it has these giant guns on it, on turrets that can turn and face in any direction. So this, what we get is an arms race, right? And especially between England and Germany, but all the countries in Europe are trying to improve their technologies, improve their navies. And part of the reason they want these big navies is to control these colonies they have overseas and to defend them. And then the other cause, kind of big cause behind World War I, is these entangling alliances. So the Entente is France, Russia, and England versus the Central Powers, which is Germany, Austria, and Italy. And so it's sort of this idea of we're going to come to your aid. If anybody attacks you, then they've attacked all of us. And that's not peculiar necessarily to World War One, but Europe was set up to basically set one side against the other. And as soon as the catalyst happens, which we're going to talk about next, that's exactly what happens. Everyone declares war on everybody else. So the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he's from Austria. He's assassinated on June 20th, 1914 by a Serbian nationalist. So again, if you remember, Serbia is a small little country. A lot of Serbians are still in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they want to become, or they want those people to become part of Serbia. So politically, one of their ideas for one of the extremist groups is we should kill the heir to the throne. Well, that doesn't obviously turn out well. What happens is Austria actually sends an ultimatum to Serbia on July 23rd, same year, 1914. Serbia actually agrees to almost all of the ultimatum except for this one point about allowing Austria to come in to um, do an investigation. But at this point, it's already, things are in motion, right? So this nation's mobilized July 28th. This is what the official start of the war. There's these strict timetables of train movements. This is what the primary mode of transportation is going to be to get troops to the front. And the whole idea is you move first, you win first, and you got to honor your alliances. So it's almost this, people think they have to do this, and they set these plans in motion. And even though some people are still trying to sue for peace, nobody wants to have their troops get there last, because if their troops get there last, then they lose. So World War I starts, and it says here, change face of warfare. You see the trenches, see the water in the trenches. These guys are wearing gas masks. Poison gas gets introduced for the first time here. You got machine guns, which obviously are very devastating to troops that are standing in the open. So the first battle we're going to talk about, and I'm only going to talk about a couple just to kind of lay the framework for what World War I looked like, is the Battle of Marne. So the Marne is here, just east of Paris. And also here, I'm going to go back real quick. I don't know if you saw the Chef-on plan, but the whole idea of Germany was that they were going to go through neutral Holland and Belgium to attack Paris on this sort of like, end around, whereas most of the French defenses were here along the border with Germany. So this Battle of the Marne happens as the German armies have come through the Netherlands and the Belgium. And I think the most important thing here really to understand is this trench warfare. Everybody thought it was going to be a quick war, troops moving quickly. It would be over by Christmas. That was a common theme. But unfortunately, what they found was that these weapons were so effective, the artillery, the machine guns, and a lot of people, I mean, if you were in the open, you got killed. So they started to dig trenches. Well, little did they know these trenches they dug, they would not move a whole lot through the whole war. These people would live in these trenches for like 4 years, and it would become very static warfare. Nothing would move quickly. And so the Battle of Marne kind of really sets this sort of precedent of like, this is what the war is going to look like. Next battle I'm going to talk about is Ypres. Looks like Ypres up here, kind of on the border between Belgium and Paris. So this is important. It's the first use of chemical weapons. The Germans are the first ones to use it. It's just chlorine. They just send chlorine gas. They don't expect it to work so well, and they're actually not really prepared to take advantage of what happens. They end up taking, some of the front. They move forward several miles, but But it adds a whole new element. Now people have to have these gas masks. They have to be prepared for gas attacks, which happen on both sides. So the French use it, the British use it, the Germans use it. Um, and so it's not like any one side was using it more than the other. But it is interesting because after the war, there were a lot of rules made about not using chemical weapons anymore because they're pretty nasty in terms of what they will do to you, depending on what the weapon is. And then the last battle I'm going to talk about is, oh yeah, Verdun. Sorry. So Verdun's right here. It's Germany, France, the kind of where they meet with Belgium there. The only reason I bring this up is, this was really probably the greatest example of World War One and what the casualties look like and what can happen. The Germans' idea was to capture this high ground above this fortress called Verdun, and then the French were just going to counterattack and they were going to mow them down. So using machine guns, artillery, flamethrowers. This is the first time the flamethrowers used, and it just was a complete bloodbath. You're talking, over 1 million total casualties by the time this thing is done. French and German bearing the bulk of those right here. And it just is a very bloody um, battle that goes on for a long time, but it kind of exemplifies trench warfare and what was so bad about it. Um, and then next time we're going to talk about the U.S. What about the U.S.? How did the U.S. even get involved in this war in Europe? I mean, the only real kind of overseas territory we own is the Philippines. So why does the U.S. get involved in this war in Europe? Extra credit, you get 1 point on your next assignment if you can tell me what president talked about avoiding entangling alliances, especially in Europe. Also down in the comments, you'll get 5 points if you tell me the multiple causes of World War One. And tomorrow, or sorry, yes, tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll be on Padlet. We're going to talk briefly, one, to get you used to using Padlet, and two, talk briefly about what happened at the beginning of World War One and could it have been avoided. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or put them in the comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. All right, good to see you guys, kinda. All right, later.